Hello, my name is Mr. Nicky. If you haven't met me before, if I haven't previously taught you, I'm an English teacher at the Asian International School, and I'm going to be doing the upper intermediate online classes with you until we're able to go back to school properly. In these online classes, we're going to be mixing speaking, reading, and writing. All skills will be combined within each lesson. So you will need a notebook and a pen handy because I might ask you to write things down. Equally, throughout the class, I might ask you to pause the video and do some speaking work. It might be pronunciation, it might be reading something, it might be answering questions. Please, for that, just pause the video and imagine that I was in front of you and give your response verbally so that we are practicing pronunciation as well. Today, we're going to be looking at Unit 7 in your solutions book, which is called Journeys, and that's on page 71. So let's begin. By the end of the lesson, the aim is you should be able to understand and explain the subtle differences between the journey-related vocabulary. You can see that in A2, just underneath the pictures. And also to be able to use this new vocabulary in spoken and written work to describe memorable journeys, trips, or excursions that you have made. So, first things first, have a look at the 4 pictures on page 71. If you can't see them, if you don't have a textbook, don't worry. I will show them on the next slide in a moment. I'm going to ask you these 2 questions. Which of these journeys do you think you would enjoy the most and why? And which of these journeys do you think you would enjoy the least and why? What I'd like to do is treat this a bit like a kind of speaking test. So I'm going to put the pictures on the slide and I'll ask the question. Once I've finished the question, please pause the video, give your response verbally, and then restart the video ready for the second question. And we'll repeat that a second time. Okay? Okay, here are the pictures. So question number 1. Which of these journeys would you enjoy the most? Question 2. Which of these journeys would you enjoy the least? Good. Okay, let's move on. Vocabulary. So this is all journey-related vocabulary. The first word that we have is break or a break. And this is basically a word for a short holiday. Anything a week or longer would be called a holiday. A weekend away, 2 or 3 days, we would just call a break. The second word is an expedition. This is an organized journey with a particular purpose. Now, expeditions usually involve traveling under your own steam as well, which means either walking or cycling or something like that. For example, when people climb mountains, we would consider that an expedition. If somebody were trying to travel to the South Pole to do some research, we would also consider that an expedition. The third word we have is an excursion. An excursion is usually a short day trip, and it's usually to a particular place. Going to visit a particular monument, museum, or place of interest might also be called an excursion. A journey. The journey is the act of traveling from one place to another. We should all be familiar with that. Next one we have is a tour. On a tour, you normally visit several places in a row, and often this is supported with a guide, somebody to show you around, usually organized in advance. Next one, an outing. An outing is usually a one-day trip, could even just be a couple of hours. Sometimes we use it to talk about sort of pleasurable experience. Maybe you're going to the cinema or a restaurant or something like that. We can also apply it to necessary tasks like going to the supermarket or visiting grandparents or elderly relatives, whatever it might be. Next one, a pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is specifically religious. So it's a journey to a holy place for religious reasons. Examples of these might be to Mecca or to the Vatican City, different depending on what the religion is. Next one we have is a trip. There are many, many uses for a trip. Trip could be synonymous with a break. It could also be synonymous for an expedition, an excursion, a journey. In fact, just about any other of those words. The only one we probably wouldn't use it as a synonym for is pilgrimage, because again, that has that specifically religious element to it, which trip doesn't have. Our penultimate word is voyage. This is usually by sea or into space. A long journey on a boat would be considered a voyage. Cruise ships would be considered a voyage. Or Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon would be considered a voyage. Lastly, travels. Travels is time spent traveling. We would often use it to ask somebody what they did on their travels. Okay, would be one way of using that. What did you do in the time you spent traveling? Okay, I'm going to ask you to pause me for a moment now while you complete exercises 3 and 4 on page 71. And this is listening to track 2.17.
Unit 7. A. Exercises 3 and 4. Speaker 1.
We boarded the coach outside the hotel. It was boiling hot even though it was only 10 o'clock in the morning. It took about 2 hours to get to the castle and there was no air conditioning on the coach, so it was a dreadful journey. We stopped off at a service station on the way there, but the building wasn't air conditioned either, so it wasn't much relief. There was a woman sitting behind us whinging the whole way about how badly organised everything was and how she was going to ask for a refund from the travel company when she got home. Anyway, when we got there, the place was absolutely heaving with other sightseers. We had to queue for ages to get in, and then we were shown round by a tour guide who I couldn't really understand because of his thick accent. When we came out, we were ripped off at the drinks kiosk. We paid £5 for 2 Cokes. Then we were herded back onto the coach for the journey back to the hotel.
Speaker 2.
We spent 3 days in the capital getting provisions and assembling all our kit. The next stage of the journey would be by plane and take us to a small landing strip deep in the jungle. From there, we'd have to travel on foot, staying as close to the river as possible. There was a tropical storm just before we boarded the plane, so we were a bit jittery about flying, but it passed over before we took off. I was still suffering from jet lag after the long flight from London and was feeling absolutely shattered. I closed my eyes as soon as I was in my seat, and although the flight was a bit bumpy, I snoozed for most of the journey, only waking up when we touched down on the landing strip.
Speaker 3.
We got a good deal because we'd only decided to go at the last minute. I'd been working pretty hard and was really looking forward to getting away for a weekend. But I have to say it was very disappointing. The hotel was a bit grubby. It didn't look like our room had been cleaned properly, so we complained. But the one they moved us to wasn't much better. And the grub was terrible, so we ended up eating out. The meals were included in the cost, so I didn't appreciate having to shell out extra. All in all, it wasn't a great experience.
Speaker 4.
The journey didn't start well because we were held up at the airport by a baggage handler's strike. But we eventually got here and found a lovely little place about half a mile away. It only has 3 or 4 guest rooms and it's run by a lovely old couple. The morning after we arrived, we decided we'd walk to the shrine, though there was a little bus that ferried people there and back. The sky looked pretty threatening, so we put on our wet weather gear, which was lucky because it started to bucket down when we were about halfway there. It didn't dampen our spirits, though. We made our way past rows of shops where they tried to flog us tacky souvenirs, but we didn't buy any, and arrived at the shrine, where we drank some of the holy water and lit candles. It was an amazing experience, the kind of thing you only do once in a lifetime.
Speaker number 2 was a tour. Speaker number 3 was a break. And speaker number 4 was a pilgrimage. Exercise 4, we're looking at informal equivalents. So an informal way of saying the same thing. So what did the speakers use instead of the words underneath? You can see for speaker 1, the first thing we had was complain. And the word which they used instead was whinge. Whinge, to complain. The second one was very crowded. And the word that the speaker used was heaving. Okay. Anytime somewhere is very busy, we would describe it as heaving. For example, Winway Street on New Year's Eve was heaving. Number 3, to make somebody pay too much would be to rip them off. Rip them off. Okay, nice colloquialism there. Number 4, nervous. The word that they used instead was jittery. It's quite a nice onomatopoeic word. When somebody starts shaking, we call it the jitters. So if somebody is nervous and shaking, we would describe them as jittery. Number 5, exhausted, synonymous with shattered. Number 6, sleep and snooze. It actually has the past tense there on the slide. I do apologize. Snooze would be synonymous with slept. Snooze would be synonymous with sleep. Number 7, dirty would be synonymous with grubby. Anybody who's got dirt on the hands, you might say they have grubby hands. Particularly bad thing at the moment. Make sure you're washing your hands, please. Number 8, synonym for food, grub. Kind of strange as we've just said grubby for dirty, but we also use grub to talk about food. Generally, when we use grub, it does mean kind of food that we really want to eat. It's not necessarily the cleanest, healthiest food. It might have lots of oil or things on it, but we would call it grub. Okay. Number 9, spend to shell out. Okay, if you spend a lot of money on one thing, you might say I shelled out on a special occasion. Too many S's in that sentence. I shelled out on a special occasion. You might want to practice trying that one. It's quite tough. Number 10, a hotel or a restaurant, place. Number 11, to rain heavily, to bucket down. Okay, if you had a bucket full of water and it would all fall out very quickly. It would be very heavy. So raining heavily, to bucket down. And the last one, selling, is flogging, to flog, to sell. Okay, if you can now please have a look at exercises 5 and 6 on that page. For exercise number 5, you need to match words 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with A, B, C, D, and E. And then for number 6, you need to use the words given to complete the sentences. Again, pause the video now, work through that, and I will give you the answers in a moment. Okay, answers to question 5. Number 1, stop off at. Number 2, show somebody round. Number 3, touch down. Number 4, get away. Number 5, hold up. Did you get all of those right? Hopefully. Exercise number 6. Completing the sentences. Number 1, the guy who showed us round the palace had some fascinating stories about the history of the place. Number 2, this evening, the taxi driver picked you up in the town centre and dropped you off at the hotel. Number 3, my uncle's returning home to the States tomorrow. I'm going to the airport to see him off. Number 4, my plane was held up and I didn't arrive until after midnight, so I stopped over in a hotel near the airport. Number 5, do stop by if you're ever in London. We can easily put you up. And last one, number 6, last summer we stopped off in Greece on our way to Israel. Okay, again, hopefully you got some of those correct, if not all. All right, a little bit lighter hearted now. We're just going to do a quick review quiz for the vocab. So hopefully you're able to remember the words we looked at earlier. If you want to rewind and have a look through it again before we start, you might want to do that. That might be a good idea. If not, we'll head straight on. Question number 1. A weekend trip to Da Nang would be best described as what? A tour, an outing, or a break? I'll give you a few seconds to think about your answer, and then I will show you. Have you chosen? Good. A short holiday. Hopefully you got that. It was a break. An outing would be too short, and we haven't said that we're going to lots of different places, so it wouldn't be a tour. Question 2. What type of journey is pictured below? Okay, so we can see it's on a boat. It's quite an old boat. This would have been a very long time ago. It was probably a very long journey, and that would be a voyage. Question 3. A trip to the supermarket would be best described as what? An expedition, an excursion, or an outing? The correct answer for that would have been an outing. Question 4. Which vocabulary word would best fit in the black space below? So have a look at the picture. You can see there's a bit that I've blacked out there. Which word do you think would best fit in there? Okay, time's up. The word should have been voyage. Okay, we said voyage can apply both to journeys at sea and in space. Number 5, a trip to the Vatican City, Mecca, Jerusalem, or Badrinath for religious purposes is called what? A pilgrimage, a journey, or a tour? Ready for the answer? The correct answer was a pilgrimage. Okay. Sir Edmund Hillary on the left and Tenzing Norgay on the right of the picture were the first people to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Which vocabulary word best describes their journey? A trip, travels, or an expedition? Okay, so this was a journey with a particular purpose. They traveled under their own steam, using their own energy rather than vehicles. So we would call this an expedition. Okay, if you recognize that building from Hanoi. While on a city break to Hanoi, I decided to visit the Ho Chi Minh Museum. Which pair of words could both be used to describe this? Is it A, pilgrimage and outing? B, outing and excursion? Or C, excursion and pilgrimage? The correct answer for that would be B. Outing or excursion could both be used to describe a journey to the museum. Pilgrimage would not be correct, even though Ho Chi Minh is a very important figure for Vietnamese people. He's not the topic of a religion, so it wouldn't be considered a pilgrimage. Okay, what did you get out of 7? All right, final task for this week's lesson, writing. This is to be emailed to your English teacher, please. It's up to you how long you want this to be. I would suggest the longer the better, in a sense, but try not to bore the pants off them. Firstly, tell your own story of a memorable journey, trip, or excursion. It could be positive or negative. I personally think speaking about a negative experience might be slightly easier. You can often recall more details, and it's maybe slightly easier to put into a whole story. Your writing should include where you went, what happened, and why it was memorable. And your writing should be at least 300 words. If your story is too short, tell a second. Some of you may be able to complete 300 very easily. You can go longer if that's the case. When you're writing, please try and remember to use as much of today's vocabulary as possible. Okay, so to review our objectives. Have you understood the subtle differences between journey-related vocabulary, and can you explain the differences? If you were able to get a good score in the quiz, that would suggest you have, which is excellent news. If not, please go back to the beginning and review the vocabulary one more time. Second, have you been able to use the new vocabulary in spoken and written work to describe memorable journeys, trips, or excursions that you have made? Hopefully you have finished your writing for your Vietnamese program teacher now. If you have, this is also ticked off, which is excellent. So that is where we are going to stop for this week. Thank you very much for taking part. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.